Welcome loves, let's get cozy and make something beautiful with a sewing machine. I'm craving a sewing palette cleanser, something manageable yet beautiful to reboot my sewing mojo. The sewing version of a lemon sorbet, if you like. It's the middle of winter here in the UK, the season that always weighs heaviest on me. At this time of year, depression can settle in like a low, unmoving cloud, dimming everything, stubborn to shift. And yet somewhere within that greyness, I found some pockets of sunlight, enough light to want to stitch. This quilt has been quietly becoming for some time. Last summer, I got married to my partner Mish. Before the ceremony, in the garden, we gathered armfuls of flower petals, each chosen not just for their beauty, but for their natural dye magic. Marigolds, rose, cosmos, coreopsis petals, carrying colour in their veins. When the ceremony ended, we were showered in this cosmic confetti thrown by the people we love. The petals drifted down onto family heirloom cotton bed sheets carefully laid along the aisle by dear friends. Before the wind could steal them away, those same friends gently rolled up the petal-strewn fabric, preserving that moment of matrimony. A week later, I boiled the sheets in a great big pan full of steam and witchy wishes, letting memory and colour steep into the cloth. The cotton emerged freckled with ochre, yellow and blush pink, the quiet fingerprints of old neighbours marigold and rose. The magic of that day felt held there, in the spontaneity of the stains, in the way joy refuses to be tidy. We dried the sheets on the line beneath the blazing summer sun, and then, inevitably, life hurried on, the fabric was folded away, time slipped past. Until winter came again, until the melancholy deepened and I wanted to hide from the world. And then, as if on cue, my dear friend Katrina Wilde, far more skilled in the art of natural dye than I am, sent me a bundle of dyed scraps from her studio in Stoke. A small, generous reminder, a nourishing nudge. I opened the cupboard, pulled out the mottled wedding sheets and thought maybe now is the time. Maybe all this beauty has been waiting for me, patiently through the turning of the seasons. Is there anything more satisfying than taking a wonky old scrap, pressing it flat and slicing through it with a rotary cutter until you have a perfectly straight edge? Sometimes I begin here without any clear idea of what the final design will be. It's a way in, it gets me in the mood. Once I have a handful of uniform strips, I make a single block, just to test the feeling. Does this process want to be repeated, enough times at least to become a quilt large enough for a double bed? I've always loved sewing log cabin blocks, but not done it at this larger scale. I needed to know how it would feel in my hands. I can confirm, I like this process. It feels good. The naturally dyed colours make my heart melt, and the log cabin's repetition is soothing enough that I can slip into a kind of meditation, spiralling strips outwards, turning methodically at right angles, over and over again. I commit, I'm in. I cut more strips, I find the flow, I gather all my tools around me. I decide the humble swivel chair is the unsung hero of the sewing room. What an ease it is to glide seamlessly from sewing machine to ironing board. The tunes are on, the blocks multiply, the depression begins to lift. I'm endlessly grateful for a creative practice that can shift my mood like this, simply by showing up. The days are short, but the Christmas lights are still up to bring sparkle to the evening. A pattern begins to emerge. My mum pops in to help me square up the blocks. Her hands so like mine, but with 30 years more muscle memory worked into them. Coming back the next day feels easy when you've made good progress on the day before. The hardest part is over. Now it's about momentum. But before I dive straight back in, I pause to take stock to see where we are. I recommend you never start layering a quilt without first holding the quilt top up to the light. Honestly, I almost wish I'd stopped right there and turned it into a curtain. Something to live forever in this glowing state, catching the sun, its rays illuminating the golden star at the center. But I'd already committed to a quilt, and it didn't occur to me to change tact at this stage. So on to the back. I didn't want a single solid piece, but a gathering of all the naturally dyed colours, large, generous swathes of cloth. I wanted to include a beautifully embroidered section from the edge of the sheet, but it needed its own backing so the wadding wouldn't push through. I patched strips together, built the layers, stitched them down. I lay everything out on the table, the same table that dictates the maximum size of my double quilts. Any bigger and there's nowhere flat enough to work. These friendly fabric bedfellows are joined in big, uncomplicated sweeps, and suddenly the back of the quilt is complete. It took far less time than the front, and yet I find myself wondering if I like it more in its simplicity. That's the joy of a quilt, I suppose. You can choose which side you want to live with. I layer everything up and begin basting. It's late, I should stop, I don't. I just want to quilt a little bit to see how it might look, but tired eyes and lazy hands lead to mistakes, and the rest must wait until morning. I decide not to follow any straight lines, instead quilting freestyle. Wavy diagonals across the piece, something looser, wilder to rub up against the strict geometry of the log cabin. I'm not sure I love it, but I've already finished a third, and I love the idea of unpicking it even less. Then comes that familiar creative whiplash. It all suddenly feels too pastel. I hate it. I know I'll come back around eventually, usually after a tweak or two. I add a solid pistachio green border, hoping it will pull it out of pastel land. It helps a little, I think. I finish by binding the quilt using the backing fabric. Someone please explain why mitered corners sometimes lie perfectly flat on the first fold and other times need to be coaxed into submission. As I hand stitch the binding closed, I'm grateful for this quiet, steady way of marking a moment that was so emotional, so full, so overwhelming. A wedding day passes in a heartfelt blur of stimulation and exaltation. This cloth brought me back, rooted me again in the love of it all.